You just have to decide, are you a carrot, egg, or coffee bean? What's up, everybody? This is Mario, and in today's episode, I want to share a simple but powerful lesson that I heard this weekend. So I was back in my hometown of Madison, Wisconsin this weekend, and one of my absolute favorite parts of going back home is just having an early morning coffee with my dad. So my dad is probably one of my biggest role models in life, and he has had a super positive impact on me. And growing up, he would coach me in every single sport. Soccer, baseball, basketball, football, you name it, he coached it. And some of my favorite memories are with him as a coach and with me playing these sports that I loved. You know, whether we were winning summer baseball tournaments when he coached me in high school baseball, or when he coached us in high school football. It was some of my favorite memories with him. And he had an amazing career, and he went on to become a Hall of Fame high school football coach in the state of Wisconsin. And as a coach, we talked a lot about leadership, success, and how to treat others, and really how sports teach us a lot more about life than they do about anything else. And in those early morning coffee conversations, we swap different books, videos, and documentaries that we like and that inspire us. And so recently, he asked me if I had heard of the Coffee Bean book or the Coffee Bean story and message, and I hadn't. And that's what has kind of inspired this podcast for today. So the Coffee Bean is a book that's co-authored by Jon Gordon and Damon West. And if you know, if you're into professional development, leadership, anything like that, you may be familiar with Jon Gordon. He's an author of, a number of books, maybe 20 or 30 books. But he was inspired to write the Coffee Bean book after hearing about Damon West's story from Dabo Sweeney, who's the head football coach at the University of Clemson. And the story goes that Damon West was a college football quarterback at the University of North Texas, and then he was a successful kind of investor and businessman in the early 2000s. But before that, after that, he actually ended up becoming addicted to crystal meth in the mid 2000s. And to fuel his meth habit, he and a few other addicts would steal from homes in the Dallas, Texas area. And they would use the money from selling those items to buy drugs. And it got so bad that he was doing that all the time. And he was just in this really dark place and surrounded by a lot of negative people. And it got to the point where eventually one person that he was hanging around with got arrested by the cops and told him where he was, told him about his location. And eventually the cops came in, busted through the door, and they took him to jail. And after a lengthy court trial, he was sentenced to 65 years in jail, which is basically a death sentence for him at the time. And a few minutes after hearing that he was going to jail for 65 years, he had 5 to 10 minutes with his parents. And his parents confronted him, and his father couldn't even speak to him because he was so disappointed, embarrassed, and shocked. But his mom did all of the talking. She told him that debts are meant to be repaid, and he had a serious debt that had to be repaid to the state of Texas for the acts that he had committed. But the biggest debt was the one that he owed his parents after everything that they had done for him. They had tried to raise him in a loving house where they valued integrity. They taught him about being honest and telling the truth. And it was a household full of love, but he had chosen to make these decisions that put him in the place that he was in. And because of that, he was going to need to repay that debt. And the way that he was going to need to go about that is to turn his life over to God, like the way that they had raised him, pay off his debts, and then find a way to turn his life around. And she told him no gangs and no tattoos when he goes to jail. And he agreed to this, through tears and said, okay, yeah, fine. And he agreed, and then she said goodbye to him. And once he got to jail, that had stuck with him. And he started to pray, and he started to ask other inmates how they had managed to survive in jail so far, and how was he going to do this. And everybody that he had met told him how important it was to join a gang in order to survive because of all the different racial tensions that were present within the jail. He met person after person that kept telling him this until one day he met Mr. Jackson, who was an African-American man of around 60 years old. And Damon told Mr. Jackson the story about the conversation with his parents. And because of that, Mr. Jackson would tell him positive messages. He was a very positive man. And he asked him this simple question. If you want to survive in here, you need to ask yourself, are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean? And Damon didn't really understand, so he told him this story. So he said, what happens when you put a carrot in really hot water? Clearly, it gets soft. And that carrot becomes softened and it becomes weakened by its environment. And it was impacted by the conditions that it was in. He asked them then the next question, which is, what happens when you put an egg inside of a pot of boiling water? In this scenario, clearly you get hard-boiled eggs, and that's pretty obvious. And the hot water causes the egg to harden. The egg is hardened by its environment and the conditions that it's in. And then finally, he asked him that last question, which is, what happens when you put a coffee bean in really hot water? In this scenario, the coffee bean converts the hot water around it into this amazing substance that we all love, which is coffee. So instead of getting hard or soft, the coffee bean transforms the outside environment from the inside. And it's one of the simplest and most powerful lessons that you will ever learn, which is life is difficult. Life can be hard. Sometimes it can be stressful, and it can feel like being in a pot of boiling hot water. And these environments that we find ourselves in, they can change, weaken, or harden us, and they test who we truly are. So in those scenarios, like, how do you react? You can be like the carrot that weakens in the pot, or like the egg that hardens. Or we can be like the coffee bean and kind of discover the power that's inside of us to transform our environment. And so because of that lesson, because of that story from Mr. Jackson, Damon West went on to live his life like that coffee bean and trying to understand the power inside of him and transform the environment around him. Because of that, he was surrounded and he attracted other people who had that positive mindset. And because of that, he went on to turn his life around and survive in jail. And then after being in jail for around 7 years, he was put on parole. And since then, he has dedicated his life to sharing this coffee bean story and message to people all over the world. And I heard this story this weekend from my dad, and he showed me a YouTube video about it, and it led me to read more about this story and listen to the audiobook. And I want to kind of bring it back to you and talk about this message. You just have to decide, are you a carrot, egg, or coffee bean? Because I want you all to know that you have a choice, and that's, you can be like that carrot that's weakened by the environment. You can be like the egg that's hardened by the environment, or you can be like the coffee bean that transforms the environment around us. And that's why I love endurance events so much, because it teaches us how to manage stress, overcome challenges, and develop the confidence that is necessary to succeed in your everyday life. So wherever you go and whatever you do, remember that you are that coffee bean, and you can be that coffee bean, and you have the power to transform any environment that you're in. So no matter how hard things get or how hopeless things look, don't give up. Realize that we don't create our world from the outside in. We create and transform it from the inside out. So that's what I have for you today with that story of the coffee bean. I hope that it serves you, and I hope that that's helpful, and I hope you all have an amazing day.